drumming of the void. The following script is based upon the book titled The Gods of Pegana, authored by Lord Dunsany, and first published in the year 1905. Chapter 1. The Silence Before the Beat. Thick mists swirl in the absolute void before the first dawn ever touched the dark borders of the ancient universe. Two unfathomable forces stand within this formless expanse to cast lots for the ultimate dominion of all things. Fate and chance engage in a silent game across the endless shadows to decide the ownership of the grand design. One victor rises from the cosmic dust and steps boldly forward through the heavy fogs of the uncreated cosmos. The winning entity approaches the sleeping form of the ultimate creator to claim the right of infinite control. A singular command echoes across the formless dark to demand the immediate forging of new and powerful deities. The supreme entity known as MANA-YOOD-SUSHAI stirs within the absolute center of the vast and empty nothingness. He breathes the initial sparks of existence into the chilling atmosphere to manifest the first pantheon of gods. The immense labor of bringing these divine beings into reality drains the unfathomable energy of the great maker. A profound exhaustion settles over the massive frame of the architect as the new deities take their initial breaths. The creator constructs a solitary drummer from the primordial shadows before submitting to the overwhelming sleep. This chosen being bears the name of Skal and holds the most critical responsibility within the entire universe. Skal fashions a crude instrument from the raw materials of the void to perform his eternal and unending rhythm. He seats himself upon the swirling mists directly before the gigantic resting feet of the silent sleeping maker. The wooden mallet strikes the stretched hide for the first time and shatters the perfect quiet of the empty dark. A steady and relentless beat emanates from the solitary drummer to form the foundational pulse of true existence. The heavy sound of the percussion creates a soothing resonance that forces the tired creator into a deep slumber. The newly formed deities gather in the absolute middle of time to witness the commencement of this endless music. A profound hush falls upon the gathered pantheon as they realize the terrifying nature of the sleeping architect. Silence coats the celestial realm of Pegana entirely, except for the constant and methodical thumping of the drum. The newly made deities communicate using only silent hand gestures to ensure that the primordial rest remains completely undisturbed. The small gods understand that their very survival depends entirely on the tireless swinging of the rhythmic arm. Kib and Sish and Mung take their positions among the celestial heights to observe the mechanical flow of the ages. Skal continues his monotonous labor without the slightest pause, regardless of the changing seasons across reality. The rhythmic vibrations ripple outward through the expansive darkness to generate the physical structures of space. Countless stars ignite within the frozen heavens strictly as a direct reaction to the continuous percussive force. Vast solar systems and spinning planets materialize in the blackness, merely as the distant echoes of the loud drum. The blazing comets and circling moons serve as complex celestial toys, created specifically for the endless amusement of the small gods. Some entities whisper that the glittering galaxies are simply the troubled dreams of the resting maker taking shape. The physical universe remains an accidental byproduct of a musical mechanism designed strictly to maintain the rest. The immortal arm of the dedicated musician gradually grows weary under the crushing weight of uncountable millennia. A dangerous stiffness creeps into the celestial muscles of the soul being responsible for the continuation of time. He forces his exhausted limb to rise and fall with mechanical precision to prevent the unraveling of the grand design. The slightest hesitation in the tempo would instantly shatter the delicate illusion holding the material plane together. MANA-YOOD-SUSHAI requires only a fraction of a second of absolute quiet to awaken from his deep and restorative slumber. An awakened creator would immediately erase the current iteration of the cosmos to replace it with an entirely new concept. The small gods and their shining worlds would instantly dissolve into nothingness if the drummer falters for a brief moment. The survival of every burning sun relies entirely upon a fragile and continuous sequence of perfectly timed physical impacts. The immense cosmic machine operates without any inherent mercy or underlying moral purpose to guide its perpetual motion. The entire scope of material existence serves only as a temporary distraction against the terrifying backdrop of the void. The pantheon of deities performs their divine duties while trapped within a reality that could evaporate without any warning. Every living creature and every solid mountain represents nothing more than a fleeting hallucination in a sleeping divine mind. The unyielding rhythm echoes across the forgotten boundaries of the rim to dictate the exact duration of the ongoing universe. Skal strikes the tight leather surface again and again to defend the fragile architecture of creation from absolute destruction. The physical world persists purely because a solitary and exhausted entity refuses to drop his heavy mallet into the dark shadows. All recorded history and future destinies remain completely bound to the inexorable and hollow drumming of a mindless cosmic servant. Chapter 2. The Amusement of the Small Gods. Deep within the absolute middle of time sit the newly formed deities surrounded by the thick darkness. These small gods communicate exclusively through intricate hand gestures to preserve the sacred quiet. Any spoken word would instantly shatter the silence of Pegana and awaken the slumbering creator entity. Glowing fingers trace elaborate patterns across the empty void to weave the very first threads of light. The silent assembly decides to construct magnificent houses of the sky to amuse themselves during the wait. They forge a brilliant burning comet designed to endlessly seek the hidden edges of the expanding cosmos. This bright seeker possesses a flaring tail and returns from its vast cosmic journey every 100 years. A pale watcher emerges from their weaving hands, bearing a wrinkled face scarred by thousands of valleys. The silent moon slowly orbits the heavens to continuously observe the petty games played by the creators. The pale celestial watcher stares blankly down at the shifting oceans and rising continents with unfeeling craters. They place the immovable star of the abiding deep within the northern sky to rest eternally among the moving. The distant star of the abiding remains locked in the frigid northern expanse to signify the concept of true rest. The divine beings raise their hands once more to manifest a solid planet specifically designed to wander. This spinning earthly sphere functions as a designated theater where the fragile mortal inhabitants can safely wander. 1 entire million of mortal years passes completely unnoticed over this initial game of the silent deities. The celestial entity named Kib eventually grows tremendously weary of playing with these lifeless spheres. He raises his dominant hand within the middle of all things to cover the blank earth with roaming beasts. The first primitive beasts lumber clumsily across the cooling volcanic rock without any comprehension of their maker. The remaining gods gesture frantically to question the nature of these strange objects that refuse to shine. Kib casually signals back to his peers that this chaotic and unpredictable new element is simply called life. A dark jealousy immediately consumes the mind of Mung upon witnessing the spontaneous movement of the beast. The envious god unleashes the concept of death among the living creatures, but fails to eradicate them fully. Another 1,000,000 years evaporates into the void as the second cosmic game unfolds across the planetary crust. Kib tires of the simple animals and manipulates their fundamental forms to craft the first generation of men. The pantheon recoils in profound terror that these newly forged humans might uncover the secret of the gods. They quickly drape a heavy veil of profound ignorance across human consciousness to obscure the divine truth. The impenetrable veil of ignorance prevents the fragile mortal minds from perceiving the true horror of their reality. Mung remains constantly busy, walking among the fragile mortal settlements to sunder their flesh from existence. The other divine architects abandon their celestial architecture to gleefully participate in the game of life. The God of Life eventually commits the ultimate transgression by speaking aloud with a mouth like a mortal man. The resonant frequency of the forbidden spoken word rips through the atmospheric layers and violently shakes the rim. This reckless vocalization permanently shatters the primordial silence that once blanketed the worlds and Pegana. A fierce and immediate anger ripples through the assembled deities as the dangerous vibrations strike their ears. They continue to manipulate the fates of humanity, despite the looming threat of the ultimate creator awakening. The collective fear of the ultimate creator waking up forces the small gods to tread carefully within their own game. These entities know they will face the withering laughter of the supreme architect when he finally ends his rest. They plan to hastily hide their suns and planets behind their backs the moment the infinite drummer stops playing. They fully understand that their beloved cosmic playground will be annihilated the moment the ancient rest concludes. Mortal civilizations construct elaborate temples and offer desperate prayers to these callous and petulant forces. Human suffering means absolutely nothing to beings who treat the rotation of galaxies as a passing entertainment. The sprawling cities and desperate wars of humanity exist solely because immortal entities required a distraction. The complex illusion of human destiny serves as a convenient byproduct of divine boredom within the middle of time. Every philosophical triumph and agonizing defeat merely decorates a temporary plaything waiting to be discarded. Human life does not reflect a grand cosmic design, but functions strictly as a meaningless toy for the small gods. Chapter 3. The Hound and the Sea. Sish steps constantly forward across the broken surface of the physical world without ever looking backward. The relentless destroyer of hours treads heavily upon the present moment to drive the turning of the ages. A terrifying beast follows closely behind this inexorable deity to consume the remnants of passing moments. The invisible hound of time keeps its sharp teeth permanently fastened at the fragile throat of the present. This ravenous animal devours all existing things across the continents to satisfy an unquenchable hunger. Only the forgotten garden of Warnath Mavi escapes the crushing jaws of the ancient and relentless beast. Sish deliberately restrains his old hound from crossing the sacred borders of this hidden southern valley. The flowers within that untouched sanctuary bloom exactly as they did when the divine creators were young. Every other civilization and soaring monument inevitably crumbles into fine dust beneath forces all living matter toward the deep waters of the waiting ocean floor. Far beyond the dusty plains resides the powerful god, Slid, whose vast and unfathomable soul is in the sea. All gliding rivers and foaming streams eventually empty their gathered waters into his immense blue domain. This miser lord of wealth hoards countless pearls and precious gems hidden far beyond the reach of mortals. Slid smiles upward at the smaller gods, while resting comfortably beneath the brilliant light of the suns. The crushing might of the ocean responds instantly whenever this aquatic deity decides to sway the currents. He claims the brittle bones of 100,000 wandering souls who desperately followed his distant cry, those who hear the compelling voice of the water forsake their stable homes to find rest within the waves. Rune, the god of going dances continuously before the spinning worlds to ensure they never remain perfectly still. This restless spirit whispers gently at the edges of the evening to drive mortals outward across the empty lands. His invisible footfall completely shatters the temporary comfort of those seeking a peaceful and abiding shelter. No towering mountain range or vast ocean boundary can successfully limit the inexorable commands of the wanderer. He constantly sends the rushing winds and flowing streams toward the waiting depths of the all-consuming sea. A stark contrast exists between these immense cosmic deities and the 1,000 tiny gods residing by the hearth. These minor entities inhabit the immediate domestic spaces to quietly manage the smallest details of daily life. Pitsu carefully strokes the sleeping cat, while Hobith works diligently to calm the anxious and protective dog. Habaniah rules over the glowing embers as the undisputed lord of the fading warmth within the darkened dwelling. Old Griborn sits directly within the hottest core of the crackling fire to slowly turn the solid wood into ash. Little Zumbibu commands the settling dust that drifts silently through the shafts of light crossing the room. These home gods never ascend to the lofty heights of Pegana because they are significantly smaller than humans. Kilulugung stretches his lean grey arms upward to carry the twisting smoke directly toward the distant sky. He hopes the superior deities will notice his dedicated work and acknowledge his modest contribution from above. Jabim sits quietly behind the house to mourn the discarded objects and broken things left forgotten by mortals. Tribugi ensures that the quiet darkness remains completely undisturbed by the playful movements of the shadows. The Lord of Dusk sends his shadowy children to dance across the empty walls when the glowing embers finally fade. Hish, the Lord of Silence, creeps slowly from the dark forest to hush the tiny mice and silence the midnight winds. This nightly suppression of sound prepares the heavy atmosphere for the arrival of the god of little fancies. Even the grandest rivers of the plains once attempted to rebel against the established laws of the natural world. They flooded the valleys and drowned the helpless humans to briefly imitate the cruel games of the higher gods. Mung dispatched a terrifying drought to grin endlessly at the rising waters until the rebellious currents shrank. The natural order inevitably reasserts its dominance over any minor disruption caused by the lesser home spirits. The cosmic forces of time and decay operate on a scale that completely dwarfs the localized comforts of the home. Every single burning ember and shifting ocean current connects directly to the complex amusement of the creators. The illusion of domestic security serves only as a temporary buffer against the endless grinding of the universe. Mortality remains entirely trapped between the hungry jaws of the hound and the crushing depths of the cold sea. Even the smallest comforting flame upon a stone hearth burns simply as an isolated fragment of the divine play. Chapter 4: The Mouthpieces of Ignorance. 7 barren deserts lie completely undisturbed beyond the final distant city of the resting caravans. Deep within the absolute center of this forsaken wasteland stands a massive image carved from the living hill. This towering stone monument bears the distinct likeness of HOUND, who discovered the ultimate hidden secret. The crushing weight of this forbidden knowledge transformed the joyous deity into a completely mirthless god. His silent, rocky manifestation stares endlessly across the empty sands to observe the isolated tracks of mortals. Countless fragile prophets continuously wander into these barren wastes, seeking the divine logic of the creators. Yonath stepped forward as the very first mortal visionary to declare his absolute understanding of the universe. This ancient and weary seeker eventually realized that human consciousness possesses absolutely no real knowledge. A foolish successor named Yug confidently claimed to possess the complete understanding of all earthly mechanics. The silent Lord of Death simply stepped from the shadows and made his terrifying sign to erase the foolish man. Alhireth-Hotep foolishly recorded his supposed infinite wisdom within the physical pages of a fragile human book. The relentless stalker appeared instantly behind this arrogant scholar to sunder his living soul from his flesh. Kabok emerged later and grew tremendously wealthy by falsely claiming he could successfully command the dark god. The heavy and deliberate footsteps of the relentless deity soon echoed loudly through the garden of the false seer. An overwhelming terror gripped the throat of the trembling prophet as the towering shadow stood beside his window. The terrified fraud desperately flung himself upon the dirt before the inevitable motion of the severing gesture. another mortal named Yun Ilara constructed a towering stone structure beside the ocean to curse the assassin lord. This defiant shepherd initially felt no dread regarding the silent force that regularly obliterated mortal humans. The dark god completely ignored these petty vocal insults, while the Hound of Time relentlessly ravaged the builder. The crippling weariness of a long existence eventually forced the broken old man to desperately beg for the grave. He cried out painfully into the howling wind for the sweet mercy of the dark soil to finally encompass his bones. The silent executioner merely passed by the crumbling tower without granting the final release to the ruined soul. A doomed wanderer named Yadin specifically followed the weary camel caravans toward the remote city of Bodrahan. He cast his desperate philosophical questions into the empty twilight, hoping to reach the distant ears of Hudrazai. Strange celestial messengers carried the exhausted seeker southward, far beyond the physical boundaries of the worlds. He drifted helplessly past the shining stars until he reached the jagged rocks situated directly upon the cosmic rim. An unfathomable entity known as Trogul sits endlessly upon these discarded primordial stones facing the deep void. This massive presence exists outside the divine hierarchy as a strange thing that is definitively neither god nor beast. The silent creature meticulously turns the massive black and white pages of an ancient text called the Book of Schemes. A dark page creates the earthly night, while the subsequent bright page establishes the daylight across the continents. Every single event that will ever occur has already been permanently recorded within the binding of this massive tome. The weary mortal desperately pleaded with the colossal page-turner to simply reverse the inexorable flow of the text. Trogul completely ignores all mortal lamentations because the turner of pages never responds to any desperate prayer. A hollow murmur resembling the midnight desert wind inform the human that the flipped parchment can never move backward. The acquisition of supreme wisdom grants absolutely no comfort to the fragile minds of the temporary mortal playthings. The divine entities specifically constructed human ignorance as a necessary mechanism to mask the underlying cosmic horror. Any mind that successfully breaches this protective veil immediately discovers a perfectly indifferent and mechanical void. The relentless turning of the eternal pages dictates the precise moment when the final word shall eradicate the universe. Every philosophical question uttered by a living creature ultimately dissolves into the silent mechanics of pure destiny. The gods themselves remain completely powerless to alter the dark ink that stains the rigid architecture of reality. Human understanding functions solely as a cruel trick designed to torture those who realize they cannot change the script. The absolute truth of existence is merely the endless flipping of black and white sheets by a blind and deaf monolith. Chapter 5. The Hall of Night and the Destiny God. The silent God of Destiny sits high above the fragile lives of the sprawling mortal populations to observe their ultimate end. Dora's hand clutches a heavy scourge to drive humanity forward, toward an invisible and completely unknown cosmic destination. The piercing blue eyes of this imposing deity look far beyond the limited vision of all the other small gods across the void. Every living creature functions strictly as an unknowing instrument designed to achieve the mysterious goals of this watcher. The small gods constantly question the ultimate intentions of this powerful being, while observing his strange and unyielding demands. The endless rivers run into the sea merely to serve the complex and hidden purposes established by the master of all destinies. A profound fear grips the celestial pantheon because they recognize a terrible purpose hidden deep within his shining blue eyes. This terrifying truth implies that the grand tapestry of life acts only as a temporary tool wielded by an uncompromising divine hand. The lesser deities understand that mortal life will become entirely unnecessary when the grand design finally reaches completion. A heavy and impenetrable darkness entirely consumes the sacred space, designated as the grand and imposing hall of the long night. The newly appointed high prophet, named Inborn, stands completely blind within the crushing shadows of this massive central temple. The ultimate secret of all things remains faintly written upon the towering dome, using an ancient and totally unreadable tongue. A profound realization strikes the weary prophet as he stares upward into the absolute blackness of the empty stone architecture. The holiest visionaries possess absolutely no genuine knowledge regarding the true nature of the silent gods or the universe. Inbound falls into a deep and troubled slumber, with his head resting directly against the cold stone altar dedicated to Dorojand. The supreme god of destiny enters the quiet sanctuary, wearing the deceptive and fragile physical guise of a common mortal wanderer. Brilliant blue light radiates from the eyes of the disguised entity to completely illuminate the heavy shadows of the grand temple. Dorojand gently touches the shoulder of the sleeping man to command his immediate attention without uttering a single audible word. The terrifying deity silently points toward the stretching paths of future time, descending rapidly into the terrible coming centuries. Inborn rises from the floor and begins a horrifying march alongside the grim master of destiny down the bloody avenues of dark history. The horrified prophet watches countless generations of aggressive men slaughtering each other continuously beside the dusty roadway. Human populations multiply wildly across the dirt to construct massive cities that eventually crumble backward into the blowing dust. The empty desert reclaims all traces of advanced civilizations and permanently buries their arrogant monuments beneath the deep sands. This violent cycle escalates horrifically when desperate mortal armies replace their beasts of burden with monstrous machines of iron. Advanced technological warfare eventually introduces deadly artificial mists designed primarily to extinguish massive amounts of life. These cruel chemical fogs completely erase thousands of desperate combatants without leaving any recognizable physical traces behind. A deeply unsettling peace finally descends upon the battered world simply because the sheer volume of slaughter exceeds human desire. The exhausted prophet suddenly senses a massive and terrifying stirring located directly above the high celestial peaks of Pegana. The ancient hound of time crouches low to the trembling ground while preparing to spring directly at the exposed throats of the gods. The rhythmic and foundational drumming of Skal grows noticeably fainter as the sleeping creator begins to shift his immense weight. An unprecedented and genuine expression of raw fear flashes briefly across the otherwise impenetrable face of the god of human destiny. Doroshand violently seizes the trembling prophet by the hand to aggressively pull him backward along the complicated pathways of time. The panicked deity forcefully removes the fragile mortal observer from this temporal location to prevent him from witnessing the end. Imbaun awakens violently from his profound and terrible vision to find the comforting blue dawn spreading slowly across the eastern sky. The terrified priest quickly performs the required morning rituals to prevent the angry gods from suddenly taking away the warm sun. He carries an incredibly heavy philosophical burden after understanding that the ultimate doom of the gods remains strictly hidden. The common people constantly beg their spiritual leader to reveal the exact destination of their fragile souls after the flesh fails. Imbaun chooses to craft a beautiful and elaborate lie to successfully quench the overwhelming mortal fear of permanent destruction. The burdened visionary promises his desperate followers a magnificent eternal paradise filled entirely with sweet and lush orchards. He speaks confidently about warm sunlight and unforgotten voices drifting peacefully across the highest shining peaks of Pegana. The wise prophet consciously trades his own personal hope for the supreme ability to manufacture profound psychological comfort. This entirely fabricated celestial afterlife successfully hides the terrible mechanical indifference driving the entire universe. True religious wisdom requires the deliberate construction of beautiful fictions to mask the impending certainty of the absolute end. Chapter 6: The Final Drumbeat. The immortal arm of Skal finally grows undeniably heavy and descends slowly toward the primordial resting place. A sudden and terrifying thunder of absolute silence erupts across the highest shining mountain peaks of all Pegana. This unprecedented hesitation in the cosmic rhythm instantly shatters the delicate illusion of the material plane. 3 distinct and pale moons align perfectly within the freezing northern sky, directly above the star of the abiding. These frozen celestial bodies refuse to wax or wane as they stare blankly down upon the crumbling earthly domains. The brilliant flaming comet abruptly ceases its endless searching and stands completely still within the dark void. A terrifying avian voice belonging to the ancient bird Mosan echoes boisterously above the mountains to announce the end. The lesser gods immediately recognize these undeniable cosmic signals and completely cease their petty games with mortals. An expression of utter and profound calm settles over the glowing faces of the gathered pantheon within the heavy mist. These ancient architects fully understand that the grand mechanism has irrevocably failed and their temporary reign is over. They raise their glowing hands together one final time to form the ultimate and concluding sign of the celestial creators. Magnificent galleons constructed from pure shimmering gold wait patiently at the dark, muddy banks of the river Imrana. The divine entities board these majestic vessels with supreme dignity and quiet grace. As the physical worlds begin to fade, dream-born rowers silently propel the heavy golden ships down the winding and twisting currents toward the distant silent sea. The retreating deities never look backward toward the rapidly spinning planets that served strictly as their meaningless toys. The magnificent shimmering fleet glides continuously downward through the thick spatial currents, separating the living from dead matter. A profound and utter calm radiates steadily from their ancient features because they perfectly understand the final rules of their game. The once mighty rulers of human civilization eagerly welcome the peaceful void after enduring the heavy burden of endless creation duties. Only a single dark god forcefully refuses to board the departing ships and remains firmly planted upon the violently shaking ground. Mung stands entirely alone and utterly defiant beneath the massive jagged shadow of the towering stone mountain known as Drehagobol. The relentless hound of time immediately realizes that the mortal cities and fragile human populations have completely evaporated. A fierce and unquenchable hunger rapidly drives this starving temporal beast to turn its terrible gnashing fangs toward its masters. The ravenous beast bays hungrily at the empty, collapsing sky and charges violently toward the unwavering lord of all earthly deaths. 2 unnatural days and nights pass without the comforting illumination of the vanished suns while the apocalyptic battle rages onward. The ferocious hound continuously leers and snarls before the calm face of the executioner across the barren and completely ruined landscape. The desperate animal finally springs forward with wide jaws to viciously tear out the exposed throat of the solitary, defending deity. Mung deliberately traces the final severing gesture of his dark domain and brings the heavy sword of death crashing through the shoulders. The horrific impact of the divine blade completely severs the fundamental thread tying the ravenous temporal hound to the physical realm. The collapsing body of the great beast strikes the cracked rocky terrain to generate a massive earthquake across the dying continents. The blade pierces the ancient temporal flesh and immediately begins to rust away entirely within the pooling blood of a slaughtered concept. The absolute death of time signifies that the ravenous force has fundamentally run out of passing moments and material objects to devour. A massive flood of pure quiet overflows the natural boundaries of the dry riverbed and completely drowns the remaining ruined atmosphere. The silent waters of the encroaching cosmic sea rise steadily to swallow the broken, empty heavens and the shattered rocks of the deep rim. The ultimate creator opens his immense glowing eyes as the soothing and protective rhythmic vibrations suddenly cease entirely. The overwhelming reality of the awakened monolith instantly vaporizes the departing golden galleons and the remaining fleeing lesser gods. A flawless and impenetrable darkness quickly reclaims the vast spatial territories previously occupied by the burning stars and the moons. The concept of death itself permanently evaporates because there are no longer any fragile mortal bodies left in existence to be severed. The long procession of the passing ages comes to an abrupt and absolute halt within the freezing shadows of the empty, formless wasteland. MANA-YOOD-SUSHAI sits alone within the absolute, unyielding middle of all things, without the comforting song of the hours. The fundamental state of true silent emptiness forcefully returns to dominate the architecture of the recently erased dimensions. No lingering echoes or drifting memories survive the destructive awakening of the supreme entity who designed the grand universe. The ancient resting period formally concludes, and the terrible mechanical wheel of cosmic destiny finally grinds to an absolute standstill. The colossal mind of the Maker slowly begins to construct an entirely new, unfathomable philosophical plan in the thick, surrounding dark.